Gospel of Matthew. Hear what God's Spirit is saying to you. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him, and calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, 'And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel.'" Then Herod secretly called for the wise men, and he learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Here ends the reading of words that give us insight on God. May God grant us wisdom and courage for interpretation. Emmanuel, Emmanuel.
Friends, will you pray with me? Holy One, help us to see the guiding star of love and light, and may that fill us with hope each day of our lives. And now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each and every one of our hearts be pleasing to you and acceptable in your sight, O God, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So today is Epiphany. It's the day of the church here where we celebrate the Magi and the gifts that they brought to the Christ child. And since it's Epiphany, I wanted to share with you some images. And as many of you know, I am an avid collector of memes on social media. And so I wanted to share with you some of my favorite Epiphany memes from the year, starting with this one. They were called wise men. They waited until after Christmas to shop for gifts. You know, that's the best time. You don't have to fight the crowds. You can get them 50% off. Everyone should just move their Christmas celebrations to after Christmas. Then there's this one. After the wise men left, the three wiser women arrived, bringing fresh diapers, casseroles for the week, and lots of formula. Much more practical than gold, frankincense, and myrrh. What even are those? Even the wise men were confused about that, like in this one. Right, we've picked up the gold and myrrh, but what on earth is that? Frankenstein. I heard about a Christmas play director who asked the children in the Christmas play what the gifts of the Magi were, and they thought about it for a moment, and one of the girls enthusiastically waved her hand, and she said, I know. It was cold, Frankenstein, and Smurfs. Then this meme for everyone who's been shopping on Amazon. Gold, customers who bought this also bought frankincense and myrrh. This one, the wise men, 3 wise men, and not one of you brought chocolate. What kind of wise men are they? This one, we'll give him gold and frankincense, but wait, there's myrrh. And there's only one myrrh bad meme here. There are no words to this meme, but it's a sign of the time. 3 magi getting COVID tested. You know, I remember whenever my now 6-year-old got COVID tested for the first time, it was almost 2 years ago. It was a very traumatic experience. We drove up in the car in one of those drive-through testing lines, and she got her nose swabbed, and I remember she was just beside herself. And a couple weeks ago, it was time for her to get COVID tested again. They had to take 2 COVID tests to be able to return to school. And I was very nervous about that. I was thinking about her first experience. And so I got out the COVID test, and she took the swab out of my hand, stuck it up her nose, swirled it around 5 times, put it in the other nostril, swirled it around 5 times, and handed me the swab back. She's gotten so used to that. That's it for the Epiphany memes this year. It is Epiphany Sunday. And, you know, I've got to say I was grateful for Pastor Marcella's message a couple of years ago when she talked, or a couple of weeks ago. It may seem like a couple of years to me. I've been traveling, you know. A couple of weeks ago, she gave a message and she talked about how 3 Kings Day was very important for her and almost more important than Christmas. And perhaps some of you had similar experiences. But I can safely say that that was not a part of my experience. I didn't even know what Epiphany was. I don't think I could have told you what Epiphany was until I was in seminary, and probably not my first year of seminary. I thought the 12 days of Christmas were the 12 days before Christmas, not the 12 days following Christmas and ending with Epiphany. But I've really come to appreciate this holiday in large part because I think it's the time when Matthew's version of the birth narrative gets its chance to shine. Throughout Advent and on Christmas Eve, we read the Lucan account. That's the one where there's a census and Mary and Joseph travel to Bethlehem. There's no room in the inn, so Mary gives birth and places Jesus in a manger, and then they're visited by poor, humble shepherds. We really focused on Luke this year. We built an inn up here on the chancel and invited you all to think about how we are all innkeepers and how we are preparing to make room in our hearts and our lives and our church and our world for Christ. But today is the day that we get to focus on the Magi. And this is really a pretty powerful story. The Magi see a star in the night sky, and they travel westward. They make a pit stop at Herod's palace, and then they go and they see the Christ child and leave their gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Scholars say that those gifts are largely symbolic. Gold is for earthly kingship. Kings on earth have gold, right? Frankincense was an incense used in the temple, which was supposed to represent Jesus' divinity. And myrrh was embalming. It was used primarily for embalming, and so it was supposed to foreshadow Jesus' crucifixion. We've had this tradition that the Magi were kings, but Matthew doesn't say that. In fact, that's probably later interpretation. People reading the text through Old Testament passages, like, say, Isaiah 60, which says that Israel shall be a light to everyone, and that Gentile nations will be drawn to that light and bring gifts of gold and frankincense. And scriptures like Psalm 72 that says that Gentile kings will come and bring gifts and lay them down at the feet of the King of Israel. But Matthew doesn't say that, and he also doesn't say that there were 3 of them. That number comes from the number of gifts that they brought: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So 3 kings probably isn't accurate, but still, after this sermon, we will sing "We 3 Kings" for the sake of tradition. Magi were probably supposed to be Persian astrologers. Magi is the word from which we get our English word magician. And we think that Matthew probably had in mind Zoroastrian priests, people who didn't know the scriptures but did know how to watch the sky. And in the ancient world, watching the sky was a way to make sense of the world, to make sense of what's going on in the here and now, and to predict the future. And so when these magi see a star rising, and they noticed how bright it was, for them that symbolized a ruler being born. So they head west, and they stop at the palace of Herod to tell him that he may be the king, but there is a new ruler that has been born. And shockingly, Herod is not thrilled about this news. Someone's going to come and replace me? We know that Herod the Great was both very paranoid and very brutal. Let me give you an example to demonstrate what I mean. When there was a rumor that people were going to overthrow Herod, he had his wife and sons murdered just to make sure that it couldn't happen. Caesar Augustus, who was the Roman emperor at the time that Herod the Great ruled, is rumored to have said it was safer to be one of Herod's pigs than his sons. Right? He couldn't eat pork, so it was safer to be a pig than a son in Herod's house. And so the Magi come and they tell Herod that he's not going to be in power much longer. And he says, oh. And he calls the chief priests and the scribes. And notice, it's not the chief priests and the scribes who have given him this news. It's no one from the religious establishment. It's Gentiles from afar. This speaks to what kind of ministry Jesus is going to have. He's going to bring in people from outside. He's going to bring different kinds of people together. And Herod brings the chief priests and the scribes, and he says, I haven't heard about this. Why haven't you told me about this? Where is the Messiah to be born? And then Herod sends the Magi off, and he says, oh, go and find him. And then once you found the Messiah, this wonderful, precious little baby king, I can't wait to meet him. I want to go and pay him homage. Please come back to me and let me know where he is so that I might pay him homage. Of course, we know that he has something far more sinister in mind. So the Magi go and they find the family. Notice it's in a house. And some scholars have said that, based on the amount of time that it probably would have taken them to get there from Persia, that if this had happened, Jesus could have been 2 years old by the time they arrived. So they might have found a toddler Jesus. And they give him the gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And then being warned to return home different ways. They take a different path. They return home by a different road. Then the Holy Family is warned that they need to leave. And so they flee down to Egypt. They become refugees in the land of Egypt. We hear then that Herod orders the murder of all children ages 2 years and younger. I should say that this wasn't historical. There's no evidence that that ever actually happened. It would have been consistent with Herod's character, but it doesn't seem that he actually did this. Instead, I think what we should read is a parallel with the Exodus story. Remember that story where the Pharaoh orders the slaughter of all the firstborn? Herod is doing something similar here. And notice where the Holy Family goes. They flee down to Egypt. They become refugees in Egypt, right, where Moses was. And they wait until Herod is dead, and then they come up out of Egypt and into the promised land, just like the ancient Israelites had done centuries before. And so what Matthew is doing here is he is setting Jesus up to be the new Moses. Moses was arguably the most important figure in their sacred scriptures. And so Matthew has set Jesus up, going down to Egypt, coming back up as the new Moses. This is a fascinating story, and there's a lot we could focus on. We could spend a whole sermon talking about the symbolism of Gentiles coming and giving these gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. We could spend a whole sermon talking about the dangers of having someone who is power hungry in office and the damage that they can cause. We could spend a whole sermon talking about how Jesus and the Holy Family, being refugees, mandates that we care for refugees in our world. But for the rest of our time together today, what I'd like to focus on is the idea of the star as a guiding light. The last couple of years have been pretty tough, haven't they? There have been a lot of challenges. I remember in March of 2020, we had our Ash Wednesday service, and after the service, RC grabbed me and said, "Hey, Caleb, should we be making some contingency plans for the church with this whole coronavirus thing?" And I said, "What are you talking about? What's the coronavirus?" And he said, I think it's going to affect us. And I said, "No, it's not going to be that big a deal, is it?" 2 weeks later, we had closed down for in-person worship here at the church, and it was a year before we'd be able to worship in person again. Whenever 2020 ended and we flipped the calendar into 2021, I think many of us were so hopeful that just by flipping that calendar, that all of those troubles from 2020 would be behind us. And yet, we were still living in the midst of the pandemic. There was a vaccine on the horizon and people were starting to get vaccinated, but we were still physically separated. And yet, just days after flipping that calendar, there was an insurrection at the Capitol reminding us how fragile democracy really is. And yet, we were still separated from loved ones and trying to deal with all of that. And then as we went through the year and more people got vaccinated, there was a bit of a yo-yoing, wasn't there? I mean, you could gather in person and then you couldn't. You could take your masks off and then you couldn't. You could be with loved ones and then you couldn't. It was just a constant yo-yoing back and forth. And in some ways, that was even more draining than knowing that we couldn't go and do anything. It was a challenging couple of years. And I'm sure that 2022 will have its challenges as well. But in the midst of it all, what was sustaining for me was thinking about the guiding light, the star of faith, of God's love and light. That was very grounding for me, to have this sense of faith that helped me through those times. I was constantly encouraged by this community. That in the midst of all of this, that this community still found ways to worship and to serve others out in the world, even in the midst of challenges. That filled me with hope. That we recognize that we may not have all been in the same boat, but we all were weathering the same storm and decided that we were going to do it together. That gave me incredible hope. That families, even though they were separated and they couldn't spend time with each other in the same way, that they found ways to connect, even in the midst of this great pandemic. And that gave me hope. Whenever I say that faith is like a guiding star, I'm not saying that I think that God is in control of it all, because I personally don't really believe that. It's fine if you do, but I don't. I'm not saying that I think that God has a plan and this is all a part of it. What I'm saying is that whenever we live our lives filled with love and light, that is incredibly hopeful, or at least it is for me. That whenever we experience love and light in our lives, and whenever we shine that love and light out in the world, that is a deeply hopeful act. And that there is something incredibly powerful about hope. If you have hope, you can get through just about anything. And that is one of the deepest and greatest gifts of faith, is the gift of hope. In fact, on this Sunday, as we're talking about the gifts of the Magi, I think maybe we all deserve a bit of a gift. I mean, it's a new year. I think we all deserve a bit of a gift for this new year. So on this Sunday, let's open ourselves up to receive the gift of hope. Because that gift is a gift that will get us through this new year and will allow us to live lives of love and light. It will allow us to proclaim a message of hope to the world. May it be so, and happy 2022. Amen.